The first thing Ethan Cole noticed wasn't the silence, it was how wrong the silence felt, like the world itself had paused mid-breath and forgotten how to move again. And as he stood at the edge of the abandoned property with cold wind dragging across the broken fields and dead grass whispering against his boots, something deep in his chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with instinct. The kind of instinct that had once kept him alive in places far worse than this, places where silence wasn't peace, it was a warning, and he hadn't felt that in years, not since he walked away from the life that had carved him into what he was now, a retired Navy SEAL trying to exist in a world that didn't make sense anymore, a world where people smiled too easily and slept too peacefully, while his mind still woke him up at night with echoes of gunfire, dust, and voices that never made it home, and yet standing here, staring at the decaying structure ahead of him, those memories didn't feel distant. They felt close again, like something had reached out from the past and pulled him back into it, and he exhaled slowly, adjusting the worn strap of his pack across his shoulder, telling himself this was just another stop, just another abandoned place on the long, aimless path he'd been walking since leaving everything behind. But the feeling didn't go away, it grew stronger, heavier, pressing into him as if the ground itself was trying to tell him something, and that's when he saw it, faint. Almost erased by the shifting dirt and time, but still there, still unmistakable, a set of footprints leading toward the house, and Ethan crouched slightly, his eyes narrowing as he studied them, not human, not clean, not recent enough to be fresh but not old enough to be forgotten either, and then it clicked, the shape, the spacing, the depth pressed into the soil, a dog, large, powerful, a German shepherd if he had to guess, and something about that detail made his chest tighten even more. Because dogs didn't just wander into places like this and stay, not unless there was a reason, not unless there was something tying them to it, and Ethan's gaze slowly lifted back toward the house, its windows hollow and dark, its structure sagging under years of neglect, a place that looked like it had been left behind by the world itself, and yet something had come here and stayed, and he didn't know why, but he knew one thing for certain, he wasn't walking away from it, not now, not when that old instinct was pulling him forward with a force he couldn't ignore, and so he moved, step by step, his boots pressing into the ground with quiet precision, his body falling into a rhythm he hadn't used in years but hadn't forgotten either, the way he approached unknown spaces, the way he listened not just with his ears but with everything, the wind, the air, the silence between sounds, and as he reached the front of the house, the door hanging partially open as if someone had left in a hurry or never came back at all, he paused, just for a second, letting the stillness settle around him again, letting his senses stretch into the dark interior beyond, and that's when he heard it, so faint most people would have missed it entirely, a low sound, almost a breath, almost a warning, coming from somewhere inside, and Ethan's entire body locked into place, every nerve tightening as the past collided with the present in a way that made his pulse slow instead of quicken, because fear didn't control him, it focused him, and slowly, carefully, he stepped inside, the wooden floor creaking under his weight, the smell of dust and damp decay filling his lungs as shadows swallowed the light behind him, and he didn't call out, didn't make unnecessary noise, because whatever was in here already knew he was coming, and the deeper he moved into the house, the clearer that presence became, not visible, not yet, but there, watching, waiting, and then he saw it, two eyes in the darkness, glowing faintly as they caught what little light filtered through the broken windows, steady, unblinking, locked directly onto him, and Ethan stopped instantly, his breath slow, controlled, his posture shifting just enough to show he wasn't advancing, wasn't a threat, because he recognized that stare, recognized what it meant, and as the shape behind those eyes stepped forward just enough to reveal itself, the powerful frame, the thick coat matted with dirt and time, the scars that spoke of survival, the tension in every muscle ready to react in a heartbeat, Ethan felt something he hadn't expected to feel in a place like this, not fear, not caution, but respect. Because this wasn't just a stray animal hiding in an abandoned house, this was something else entirely, something that had endured, something that had chosen to stay when every instinct should have told it to run, and for a moment, man and dog stood there in silence, two survivors from different worlds, both shaped by things most people would never understand, and neither of them moved, because in that space between them, something unspoken was being measured, something that would decide everything that came next, and Ethan knew without a doubt, whatever this dog was guarding. It wasn't just the house, the air inside the house felt heavier the moment Ethan stepped further in, like the walls themselves were holding on to something they refused to let go, and the German Shepherd didn't retreat deeper into the darkness like most animals would when faced with a stranger. Instead, it held its ground, its body angled slightly sideways, not fully aggressive but not welcoming either. A perfect balance between warning and restraint, and Ethan understood that immediately, because that wasn't fear, that was control, trained or learned the hard way, and his eyes softened just a fraction as he slowly lowered one hand, palm open, keeping his movements deliberate, slow enough to avoid triggering a reaction, because trust in moments like this wasn't built with words. It was built with patience, and the dog watched every inch of his movement, every shift in weight, every breath, its ears flicking forward and back as it processed him, measuring him, deciding whether he was a threat worth confronting or something else entirely. And then Ethan noticed something that made his stomach tighten, a subtle movement behind the dog, something barely visible in the dim light. A shape that didn't belong to the broken furniture or collapsed walls, something small, still, and hidden just enough to escape notice unless you were looking for it. And Ethan's focus shifted instantly, his body going still again as his mind recalculated everything, because this wasn't just about the dog anymore, this was something deeper, something layered, and the German Shepherd reacted the second his attention moved past it, stepping forward just half a pace, not attacking, not lunging, but making it clear that whatever was behind it was off limits, and that single action told Ethan everything he needed to know. This wasn't just a place the dog had chosen to stay. It was something it had chosen to protect, and that realization hit him harder than expected, because protection like that didn't come from instinct alone, it came from connection, from purpose, from something that mattered enough to risk everything for. And Ethan slowly shifted his stance again, lowering himself slightly, reducing his presence, his voice when he spoke barely above a whisper, "I'm not here to hurt you," and the words felt strange leaving his mouth after so long, not because they weren't true, but because he hadn't had to say them in years, hadn't had to prove that he wasn't the threat. And the dog didn't respond immediately, its gaze still locked on him, but something in its posture changed just enough to be noticed, the tension easing by a fraction, the line between attack and hesitation shifting slightly, and Ethan took that as his only opening, his only chance to move forward without breaking whatever fragile balance had formed between them, and he slowly reached into his jacket, pulling out a small piece of dried food he had been carrying, something simple, something that might bridge the gap between stranger and something more neutral, and he placed it carefully on the floor, not pushing it forward, not forcing the interaction, just leaving it there as an option, and then he leaned back slightly, giving space, letting the dog decide, because forcing anything now would destroy everything. And the silence stretched again, thick and tense, the kind of silence that made every second feel longer than it should, and then, slowly, cautiously, the German Shepherd took a step forward, its nose lowering toward the ground as it tested the air, its body still coiled with readiness, still prepared to react if anything changed, but it didn't retreat, didn't reject the offering, and that was enough, that was everything, because it meant the line had shifted, even if only slightly, and as the dog's attention flickered between the food and Ethan, its body still angled protectively toward whatever was behind it, Ethan's eyes moved again, just for a second, and this time he saw it clearly, a small figure, caught tightly against the far wall, barely moving, barely breathing, hidden in the shadows as if the world had forgotten it existed, and Ethan's heart didn't race, didn't spike the way most people's would in that moment, it dropped, heavy and cold, because he understood instantly what he was looking at, understood the weight of it, the implications of it, the story that must have led to this exact moment, and everything inside him shifted. Because this wasn't just a stray dog guarding an empty house, this was something far worse, something far more real, and the dog wasn't just protecting a place, it was protecting someone, and as that realization settled in, sharp and undeniable, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of purpose that cut through the emptiness he'd been carrying for years, and he knew, without question, without hesitation. He wasn't walking away from this, not anymore, not now that he understood what was at stake, and the moment that thought locked into place, the house creaked again, a deep, hollow sound from somewhere behind him, something shifting where nothing should have been shifting, and Ethan's head turned instantly toward the noise, every instinct snapping back into place, because whatever had been waiting in this house, might not have been alone. The sound didn't echo like a normal shift of wood or wind. Pressing through broken walls, it carried weight, intention, something deliberate that didn't belong to an empty house, and Ethan's body reacted before his mind fully caught up, his posture tightening as he turned slightly, positioning himself between the noise behind him and the fragile scene in front of him, because instinct didn't need explanation, it simply knew what needed protecting. And the German Shepherd reacted the same way in the exact same second, her head snapping toward the direction of the sound, ears pinned forward, body rigid as if every muscle had turned into steel, and there was no confusion in her reaction, no uncertainty, only recognition, and that was what sent a deeper chill through Ethan's spine than the cold air creeping through the cracks in the house, because it meant this wasn't new to her. Whatever made that sound, she had heard it before, and she had survived it before, and now it was back, and the fragile trust that had just begun forming between them shifted instantly into something else, not comfort, not safety, but alliance, because now they were no longer just two strangers measuring each other, they were two survivors facing the same unknown threat. And Ethan slowly reached down, his hand brushing against the floor as he steadied himself, his breathing controlled, his eyes scanning the dark hallway behind him where the sound had come from, and the silence that followed was worse than the noise itself, because it stretched too long, too still, like something was holding its breath just out of sight, waiting, watching, calculating, and Ethan knew that pattern, knew it from places where hesitation meant death, and he didn't wait for it to happen again, didn't give whatever was out there the advantage of surprise. Instead he moved, quiet, precise, shifting his position just enough to gain a better angle on the hallway without exposing himself completely, his mind already mapping out exits, cover points, possible threats, because survival wasn't about reacting. It was about being ready before anything happened, and as his eyes adjusted further to the dim interior, he caught movement, subtle, almost invisible, a shadow slipping along the far wall where no shadow should have been moving at all, and his grip tightened instinctively as his body locked into focus, because now there was no doubt, there was someone else here, someone who didn't belong, someone who had been moving through this house quietly, carefully, the way hunters moved when they didn't want to be seen, and that realization hit him hard, because it changed everything about the situation, because this wasn't just an abandoned place with a lost dog and a hidden child, this was a place someone had reason to return to, someone had reason to monitor, and the dog hadn't just been guarding. She had been defending, and Ethan's eyes flicked back to her for just a second, and in that moment, he saw it clearly, not just tension, not just readiness, but something deeper, something raw and unshakable, a refusal to run, a refusal to abandon what she was protecting even when danger stood right in front of her, and that kind of loyalty didn't come from nowhere, it came from bond, from connection, from something that had been built through fear and survival and time, and Ethan felt that same pull inside himself now, that same unspoken decision forming before logic could even question it, because walking away was no longer an option, not when the truth was unfolding piece by piece right in front of him, and then the floor creaked again, closer this time, sharper, and the shadow moved faster now, no longer hiding as carefully, no longer patient, and Ethan shifted instantly, stepping slightly to the side, placing himself more directly between the hallway and the dog, his voice dropping into a low whisper without taking his eyes off the darkness ahead, "Stay back," and he didn't know if the dog understood the words, but she understood the tone, understood the intent, because she didn't move forward, didn't break her position, instead she stayed exactly where she was, guarding the child, her body coiled tighter as if ready to spring the second things escalated, and for a split second, everything held again, the tension stretching thin, the silence pressing in from all sides, and then it broke, a figure stepping out from the hallway, tall, slow, deliberate, just like before. And the moment Ethan saw him clearly, something cold settled in his chest, because this wasn't just a random intruder, this wasn't someone passing through or scavenging for scraps, this was someone who belonged here, someone who had returned with purpose, and the way his eyes moved, scanning the room with a calm that didn't match the situation, told Ethan everything he needed to know. This man wasn't surprised to find something inside. He was checking if it was still there, and the moment his gaze locked onto the German Shepherd, a faint, almost unreadable expression crossed his face, something between irritation and confirmation, and that was when Ethan understood the truth, sharp and undeniable. This dog hadn't just been hiding in this house, she had been hiding from him, and whatever he wanted, he wasn't living without it. The man didn't rush forward, didn't raise his voice, didn't show panic or surprise. And that was what made everything about him more dangerous, because calm like that didn't come from confidence alone. It came from control, from knowing the situation, from believing nothing inside this house could truly challenge him, and Ethan watched him carefully, every detail registering in quiet precision, the way his shoulders stayed relaxed, the way his steps were measured and silent, the way his eyes moved not with curiosity but with ownership, like he was looking at something that already belonged to him. And that alone told Ethan this wasn't just some random encounter, this was something deeper. Something that had been going on long before he stepped into this place, and the German Shepherd reacted instantly, her body shifting forward just enough to block the man's line of sight to the child behind her, a low growl vibrating from deep in her chest now, no longer hidden, no longer cautious, but still controlled, still measured, as if she understood that one wrong move could trigger something far worse. And Ethan felt that same line forming inside himself, that invisible boundary between observation and action, and he knew it wouldn't hold for long, not with the way the man was standing there, not with the way his gaze lingered just a second too long on the dog, as if calculating, as if remembering, and then finally, he spoke, his voice low, calm, almost detached, "You shouldn't be here," and it wasn't a threat, not directly, it was a statement, one that carried weight without needing force. And Ethan didn't respond immediately, didn't give anything away, because words in situations like this were tools, not conversation, and every second mattered, every reaction mattered, and the man took another step forward, just one, but it was enough to shift the entire atmosphere in the room, because the dog reacted instantly, her growl deepening, her stance lowering, every muscle coiled and ready, and Ethan moved at the same time, not stepping forward, not escalating, but positioning himself slightly, just enough to intercept if needed, just enough to make it clear that he wasn't a passive observer anymore. And for a moment, the three of them stood locked in that silent triangle of tension, man, dog, and the stranger who had walked back into a place he clearly expected to be empty, and something about that realization sharpened Ethan's focus even further, because it meant one thing above all else: this wasn't supposed to be happening, he wasn't supposed to be here, and whatever this man had been doing, it had been hidden, controlled, untouched until now, and the disruption had changed everything. And the man's eyes shifted then, briefly, landing on Ethan with a different kind of attention, not surprise, not confusion, but assessment, and that told Ethan something else, something just as important: he wasn't panicking because of him either, which meant he either didn't see him as a threat, or he believed he could handle him, and that thought alone tightened something deep inside Ethan's chest, not fear, but something colder, something sharper, because he had seen that look before, had seen it in men who thought control was absolute, who believed nothing could go wrong because it never had before, and those were always the most dangerous ones, the ones who didn't hesitate until it was too late. And the man's gaze drifted back to the dog, his expression hardening just slightly now, that faint hint of irritation becoming clearer, and when he spoke again, his tone hadn't changed, but the meaning behind it had, move, and this time it wasn't a suggestion, it wasn't neutral, it was a command, directed not at Ethan, but at the dog. And the German Shepherd didn't move, didn't even flinch, her body staying exactly where it was, her eyes locked onto him with a defiance that didn't need sound to be understood. And Ethan felt that shift instantly, that moment where everything balanced on the edge before breaking, and his body tensed just a fraction more, his mind already calculating outcomes, already preparing for what came next, because situations like this didn't de-escalate on their own, not when control was being challenged, not when something valuable was being protected. And the man exhaled slowly, as if disappointed, as if this wasn't the outcome he had expected, and his hand moved, not quickly, not aggressively, but with a calm precision that made Ethan's pulse slow instead of spike, because he knew that movement, knew it well enough to recognize what was coming before it fully happened. And in that split second before the moment broke completely, before everything shifted from tension into action, Ethan understood one thing with absolute clarity: whatever this man had come back for, he was willing to take it by force, and there was no turning back now. The movement of the man's hand was subtle, almost invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for, but Ethan saw it clearly: the shift in his shoulder, the slight tightening in his fingers, the calm before action that always came just before things turned violent, and time seemed to stretch in that moment, every second slowing down as his mind snapped into the same precision it had lived in for years, calculating distance, reaction time, angles, outcomes. And there was no hesitation in him now, no doubt, because the situation had crossed the line from uncertainty into certainty, and the German Shepherd felt it too, her growl cutting sharper through the air as her body lowered even further, her weight shifting forward, ready to explode into motion if needed. And behind her, the child remained still, unaware of how close danger had come, unaware of how fragile the moment had become, and Ethan moved just before the man's hand fully revealed what it was reaching for, stepping slightly to the side, his voice cutting through the silence, low and controlled. Don't, and it wasn't loud, it didn't need to be, because it carried something deeper than volume, something that made the man pause, just for a fraction of a second, just long enough for their eyes to lock, and in that brief exchange, everything was understood without words. Because men like them didn't need explanations, they recognized each other in ways others couldn't, the posture, the stillness, the awareness behind their eyes, and the man's expression shifted then, not into fear, but into something more focused, more interested, as if Ethan had just become more than an inconvenience, more than an unexpected presence, and that was dangerous in its own way, because attention like that meant reassessment, meant the situation was evolving, and Ethan felt that shift ripple through the room, changing the balance again, tightening the tension even further, and the man slowly let his hand fall back to his side, not abandoning the action, just delaying it, adjusting, and when he spoke this time, his tone carried a different edge, something sharper, more direct. You don't understand what you're standing in the middle of, and Ethan didn't respond immediately, because part of him already did. Part of him had pieced it together from the moment he saw the dog, from the moment he saw the child, from the moment he felt the wrongness of this place pressing in on him, and that understanding didn't bring clarity. It brought weight, because whatever this was, it wasn't simple, it wasn't something that ended with walking away, and the German shepherd shifted slightly again, her attention flickering between the two men now, her instincts pulling her in two directions, protect the child, but also respond to the rising threat, and Ethan saw that conflict in her posture, saw the way her body trembled just slightly under the pressure of it, and something about that hit him harder than the situation itself. Because he recognized it, that feeling of being pulled between survival and responsibility, of knowing that whatever choice you made, something would be at risk, and that was the moment something inside him settled. Something that had been uncertain until now locking into place with quiet, unshakable certainty, because he had made that choice before, had lived with the consequences of it, and he wasn't going to hesitate this time, not when it mattered, and he took a slow step forward, not aggressive, not threatening, but enough to place himself more clearly between the man and the dog, and his voice when he spoke again was steady, calm, carrying that same controlled weight. I understand enough, and the words hung in the air between them, simple, but heavy, because they carried truth, and the man studied him for a moment longer, his eyes narrowing just slightly, as if trying to read something deeper, something hidden, and then his gaze flicked back to the dog, and this time there was no hesitation in it, no uncertainty, only intent, and when he moved again, it wasn't slow anymore, it wasn't cautious, it was decisive, a step forward that broke the fragile balance completely, and the German shepherd reacted instantly, her body launching forward with a force that had been held back for too long, her growl exploding into a full, raw sound as she placed herself directly in his path, and everything that had been building in that room finally snapped into motion, because there was no more waiting, no more measuring, no more quiet calculation. This had become a fight, and Ethan moved at the same time, his body reacting with a speed and precision that had never truly left him, because whatever this man wanted, he wasn't going to get it, not without going through him first, and as the space between them closed in a heartbeat, as tension turned into action and silence shattered into chaos, one truth became undeniable. This wasn't just a rescue anymore, this was a battle for something that mattered far more than any of them had expected, and once it started, there would be no easy way out. The moment everything broke into motion, it happened faster than thought, faster than hesitation, the kind of speed that only came from instinct sharpened over years of survival. And Ethan didn't see the attack as much as he felt it, his body already moving as the man lunged forward with controlled aggression, not wild, not reckless, but precise, calculated. The kind of movement that confirmed every suspicion Ethan had about him in a single second. This wasn't a civilian, this wasn't a drifter or a desperate scavenger, this was someone trained, someone who understood conflict, and that made the situation infinitely more dangerous. And yet Ethan didn't pull back, didn't retreat, because retreat meant space, and space meant opportunity for the man to reach the child, and that wasn't an option, not anymore, and the German shepherd collided first, her full weight slamming into the man's side with a force that knocked him slightly off balance, her teeth snapping just inches from his arm as he twisted, reacting quickly, too quickly for someone untrained, and Ethan stepped in at the same time, closing the gap, his hand driving forward, not with rage, not with panic, but with controlled precision aimed to disrupt, to create distance, to break momentum, and the impact landed, solid, enough to force the man back another step, but not enough to end it. Not enough to stop what had already been set in motion, and the room filled with sound now. Movement, breath, the low, relentless growl of the dog as she circled, never losing focus, never giving ground, and the man recovered fast, too fast, his body shifting back into stance with an ease that confirmed everything Ethan already knew, and for a brief second, they faced each other again, closer now, the distance between them reduced to something dangerous, something immediate, and there was no misunderstanding left between them, no doubt about what this had become, and the man's expression had changed completely now. Whatever calm detachment had been there before replaced with something sharper, something colder, and when he moved again, it was with intent, not hesitation, his hand coming up fast, faster than before, and this time Ethan saw it clearly, the flash of metal, small, controlled, but deadly in the right hands. An instinct took over completely, his body shifting to intercept, to redirect, his arm coming up just enough to deflect the strike, the movement tight, efficient, practiced. And the contact was brief but enough to push the blade off its intended path, enough to keep it from finding something vital, and the German Shepherd lunged again at the same time, her teeth catching fabric this time, pulling, dragging, disrupting the man's balance again, and the coordination between them wasn't planned, wasn't discussed, but it worked, it created pressure, it forced the man into reaction instead of control, and that was the only advantage they had, and Ethan pushed it, stepping in again, driving forward with force, not to finish, not yet, but to keep him moving back, to keep him away from the one thing that mattered most in that room, and the fight became something else then, something tighter, more desperate, the space too small for distance, too confined for clean movement, every second turning into a struggle for control, for positioning, for dominance, and the house itself seemed to react to it, the floor creaking, the walls groaning under the sudden chaos, as if the entire structure was straining under the weight of what was happening inside it, and through it all, the dog never faltered, never hesitated, her focus locked, her movements sharp. Intelligent, not reckless but precise, targeting, disrupting, protecting, and Ethan felt that again, that unspoken connection forming in the middle of violence, that understanding that they were fighting for the same thing, even if they had never met before this moment, and the man began to adjust, began to compensate, his movements shifting, becoming more aggressive, more direct, less cautious, and that was dangerous, because it meant he was abandoning control for speed, and speed in close quarters could turn deadly in an instant, and Ethan knew they couldn't hold this forever, couldn't stay locked in this back and forth without something breaking, without someone making a mistake, and the realization hit him hard and fast, they needed to end this, needed to create an opening, needed to shift the fight before it shifted against them, and his eyes flicked for just a second toward the far side of the room, toward the narrow exit he had noticed earlier, the one path that could lead them out of this place, and then back to the man again, calculating, adjusting, because this wasn't just about winning anymore, it was about getting out alive, and as the man lunged again, faster, sharper, his intent clear now, his focus locked not on Ethan but past him, toward the dog, toward the child, Ethan reacted with everything he had, stepping fully into the attack, intercepting with force, knowing that this next moment would decide everything, because if they lost control now, there would be no second chance. The impact of that final interception echoed through Ethan's body like a shockwave, not just physical but something deeper, something that reminded him exactly why he had tried so hard to leave this life behind, because moments like this didn't end cleanly, they didn't resolve without cost, and as he drove into the man with everything he had, forcing him off balance again, he knew this was no longer about control or restraint, it was about survival in its rawest form, and the man hit the side wall hard, the structure groaning under the force as dust and fragments fell from above, the old wood cracking under stress that had nothing to do with time and everything to do with violence, and for a brief second, there was space, a fragile opening that hadn't existed before, and Ethan saw it instantly, his mind locking onto it with sharp clarity, because that was the moment that mattered, the moment where decisions had to be made without hesitation, and his voice cut through the chaos, low but urgent, directed at the dog, go, and there was no time for explanation, no time for hesitation, only action, and for a fraction of a second, the German Shepherd didn't move, her eyes flicking between Ethan and the man, torn between two instincts that had defined her existence up to this point, protect what's behind you, and confront what's in front of you. And Ethan felt that hesitation like a physical force, because he understood exactly what it meant to stand between duty and survival, and he held her gaze for that split second longer. Something unspoken passing between them, something that didn't need words, and then it clicked, something shifted in her posture, something changed, and she turned, not in retreat but in purpose, her body moving back toward the child with controlled urgency, nudging her, pushing her, guiding her toward the direction Ethan had seen earlier, the narrow opening that might lead them out of this collapsing situation, and that was all Ethan needed to see, all the confirmation he required to commit fully to what came next, because now it wasn't about holding the line. It was about buying time, and the man recovered faster than expected, pushing off the wall with force, his expression now stripped of any pretense, any calm calculation replaced with something darker, something more direct, and he came forward again, not cautious, not controlled, but driven, and Ethan stepped into him once more, meeting the momentum head-on, because there was no other option, no space to retreat, no room to give ground, and the clash was immediate, brutal in its simplicity. Bodies colliding, movement tight and unforgiving, every second a struggle for leverage, for position, for control, and Ethan felt it then, the edge of fatigue creeping in, not overwhelming, not yet, but present, a reminder that he wasn't the same man he used to be, that time had taken something from him even if his instincts remained sharp, and the man felt it too, sensed it, because his attacks became more aggressive, more focused, targeting weaknesses, pushing harder, trying to break through. Instead of outmaneuvering, and that was dangerous, because aggression could overwhelm precision if left unchecked, and Ethan adjusted, shifting his weight, redirecting force instead of meeting it head-on, using what space he had, what control he could maintain, and behind him, he could hear movement now, the soft, uneven steps of the child being guided, the low, steady sounds of the dog keeping her moving, and that sound grounded him, centered him, because it meant they were still alive, still moving, still in this fight, and that was all that mattered, and then the man's hand came up again, faster. This time, sharper, the blade flashing briefly in the dim light as it cut through the space between them, and Ethan reacted instinctively, twisting just enough to avoid the full force of it, but not enough to escape completely, and he felt it then, a sharp, burning line across his side, not deep, not crippling, but real, a reminder that this wasn't a controlled environment, this wasn't training, this was survival. And pain didn't slow him, it focused him, sharpened him, and he pushed forward. Again, ignoring it, using the moment of contact to close distance instead of retreating, his movements tighter now, more aggressive, because there was no time left for caution, and the house groaned again around them, louder this time, deeper, as if the entire structure was reacting to the violence within it, and something cracked above them, a sharp, splitting sound that cut through everything else, and Ethan's mind registered it instantly, not just damage, but instability, because this place wasn't meant to hold this kind of force, this kind of movement, and if it gave out, if it collapsed, everything would be buried with it, and that realization hit hard, because now the danger wasn't just the man in front of him, it was the house itself, and as the man lunged again, relentless, refusing to stop, refusing to retreat, Ethan knew this couldn't continue, couldn't stay contained, because something was about to break, something bigger than either of them, and if he didn't act now, they weren't just going to lose the fight. They were going to lose everything. The crack above them wasn't just a sound, it was a warning, a final signal that the house had reached its limit, and Ethan felt it deep in his bones as dust rained down in thin streams from the ceiling, the air shifting, the structure groaning like something alive and in pain, and yet the man in front of him didn't hesitate, didn't even glance upward. His focus locked entirely on finishing what he had started, and that alone made him more dangerous than anything else in that moment, because he wasn't just willing to risk the collapse. He was counting on it not happening before he got what he came for, and Ethan understood that instantly, and that realization changed everything again, because now there was no more room for prolonged engagement, no more time to balance offense and defense. It had to end here, and it had to end fast, and he shifted his stance, grounding himself despite the instability under his feet, despite the sharp sting still burning across his side, because pain was irrelevant now. Survival wasn't about comfort, it was about action, and the German shepherd's distant movement echoed faintly behind him, the soft, uneven steps of the child growing slightly more urgent, slightly more desperate, and that sound anchored him completely, because it meant they were still moving, still trying to escape, and that was the only thing that mattered, and the man came forward again, faster now, pushing harder, abandoning the last remnant of control for raw aggression, and Ethan met him with everything he had Left, not holding back, not conserving energy, but committing fully to the moment, his movements sharp, direct, precise, targeting the weaknesses he had already identified, disrupting balance, breaking rhythm, forcing reactions instead of allowing them, and for a brief second, it worked. The man stumbled just enough, just long enough for Ethan to see the opening he needed, and he took it without hesitation, stepping in hard, driving his shoulder forward, using the man's momentum against him, forcing him back into the weakened section of the wall, and this time the impact wasn't contained. The structure gave way with a violent crack, wood splintering, debris falling as part of the wall collapsed inward, and both of them staggered as the house shifted around them, the floor tilting slightly under the sudden redistribution of weight, and the man lost his footing for just a fraction of a second, just enough, and Ethan didn't waste it, his hand coming up fast, gripping, twisting, forcing the blade away, redirecting it completely as he drove forward again, pushing, forcing space, forcing distance, because that was the moment, the one he had been waiting for, the one that would decide everything, and the man hit the ground hard this time, not fully down, not completely out, but disrupted enough, off balance enough, and Ethan stepped back immediately, not to disengage from fear, but to create the space he needed to break away, because staying meant risk, staying meant losing the advantage he had just gained, and he turned, his body moving instantly toward the direction the dog had taken, his voice cutting through the chaos one more time, low but urgent, move, and he didn't look back, didn't hesitate, because he knew that if he gave the man even a second to recover fully, this would start all over again, and they wouldn't get another chance like this, and the hallway ahead was darker now, more unstable, the air thick with dust and the sharp scent of broken wood, but he pushed forward anyway, his body adapting to the shifting ground, his senses stretched to their limit as he followed the faint sound of movement ahead, and he saw them then, the German Shepherd guiding the child toward the narrow opening he had spotted earlier, her movements controlled but urgent, her body still positioned protectively even as she led the way, and something about that sight hit Ethan harder than anything else in that moment, because it wasn't just survival, it was loyalty in its purest form, a refusal to abandon, a refusal to give up even when everything around them was falling apart, and that was what drove him forward, what pushed him past the pain, past the exhaustion, past the uncertainty of what waited outside those walls, and then behind him, the sound came again, not a creak this time, not a warning, but something heavier, something final, the deep, violent shift of the house beginning to collapse in on itself, and Ethan didn't need to look back to know what that meant, didn't need confirmation, because he felt it in the ground beneath his feet, in the air around him, and as he closed the distance between himself and the dog, as the opening ahead came into clearer view, one thing became painfully clear, whatever happened next. They had only seconds left to get out, the moment stretched thin as the house began to give way behind them, every sound sharpening into something urgent and final, the deep cracking of beams splitting under pressure, the heavy thought of collapsing wood hitting the floor in violent bursts, and Ethan felt the shift beneath his feet like the ground itself was turning against them, unstable, unpredictable, ready to swallow everything if they hesitated for even a second, and he pushed forward harder, closing the last few steps between himself and the German Shepherd, who had already reached the narrow opening, her body pressed low as she guided the child through it fast, nudging her gently but firmly, refusing to leave her side even as the danger closed in around them, and Ethan dropped down immediately, lowering himself to their level, his movements quick but controlled as he helped the child through the opening, his hands steady despite the chaos, because panic would only slow them down. And the moment the child was clear, the dog slipped through next without hesitation, turning immediately on the other side to face back toward him, her eyes locked onto his with that same unwavering focus, that same unspoken connection that had carried them this far, and Ethan followed right behind, pulling himself through just as a loud crack split the air behind him, louder than anything before, followed by a heavy crash that sent a shockwave through the ground, dust and debris rushing forward through the opening as part of the house collapsed completely, sealing off the space they had just escaped from, and for a moment, everything went still, the noise fading into a heavy, ringing silence broken only by the distant sound of falling debris settling into place, and Ethan lay there for a second, catching his breath, the cold air outside hitting his face as reality settled back in around him, and then he pushed himself up immediately, turning to check on the child, who was sitting just a few feet away, trembling but conscious now, her wide eyes filled with fear and confusion as she looked between him and the dog, and the German Shepherd stood right beside her, close enough to touch, her body still tense but no longer coiled for attack, her attention shifting between the girl and the collapsed house behind them, as if still expecting the danger to follow them out, and Ethan moved closer slowly, lowering himself again, his voice soft but steady as he spoke to the child, words that didn't need to be perfect, only reassuring enough to ground her in the moment, and she didn't respond immediately, didn't speak, but her gaze stayed fixed on him, searching, uncertain, and then she reached out slightly, her small hand brushing against the dog's side, and the German Shepherd didn't move away, didn't flinch, she stayed exactly where she was, allowing the contact, reinforcing the connection that had clearly been built long before Ethan arrived, and that single moment said more than anything else could have, because it confirmed what he had already begun to understand, this dog hadn't just been protecting the child. She had been her lifeline, her shield, her constant in a world that had clearly failed her in every other way, and Ethan felt that realization settle deep in his chest, heavy but clear, because it meant this wasn't just about getting them out of that house, it was about what came next, about what they had survived, about what they still needed, and as he stood slowly, his eyes scanning the surrounding area, the open land stretching out in all directions under a sky that seemed too calm for what had just happened, he knew they weren't safe yet, not completely, because the man had been real, and real threats didn't disappear just because a structure collapsed, and as if the thought itself had pulled it into reality, a faint sound echoed from the debris behind them, not loud, not clear, but enough to make Ethan freeze for just a fraction of a second, his attention snapping back toward the ruined house as his instincts fled again. Sharp and immediate, because if there was one thing he knew for certain, it was that this wasn't over, not yet, and whatever had survived inside that collapsing structure might still be coming. The sound from the collapsed house was faint, almost buried beneath the settling debris, but it was enough to pull Ethan's full attention back toward the ruins, enough to remind him that endings didn't come easily, not in situations like this, and he stood there for a moment, his body still, his breath controlled, his mind already preparing for the possibility that what they had just escaped might not be finished with them yet, and the German Shepherd reacted the same way, her body shifting slightly in front of the child again, her ears forward, her gaze locked on the broken structure as if she could see through the layers of debris and dust, as if she was searching for something she had learned never to ignore, and Ethan understood that instinct now, understood the way she read the world not just for what it showed, but for what it tried to hide, and slowly, carefully, he stepped forward just a few paces, not leaving them unguarded but positioning himself where he could see more clearly, where he could react if something emerged, and the silence stretched again, heavy but not empty, and then it settled, the faint sounds fading, the movement stopping, and nothing came out of the wreckage, no figure, no threat, just the stillness of something that had ended, or at least paused, and Ethan didn't relax immediately, didn't let his guard drop, because experience had taught him better, had taught him that silence after chaos could mean safety. Or it could mean something worse waiting just out of sight, but as the seconds passed and nothing changed, something inside him shifted, just slightly, just enough to let him breathe again, and he turned back toward the child and the dog, his focus returning to what mattered most now, and as he approached them again, the child's eyes followed him, still wide, still uncertain, but no longer completely lost, and he lowered himself once more, keeping his movements slow, deliberate, his voice steady as he spoke again, "You're safe now," and this time the words carried more weight, not because the danger was gone, but because he meant them, because he had made that decision fully, without hesitation, and the child didn't speak, didn't respond in words, but she didn't pull away either, didn't hide, and that alone was enough, and the German Shepherd remained close, her body no longer tense with immediate threat, but still alert, still aware, as if she was learning something new in this moment, something unfamiliar, something that hadn't been part of her world for a long time, calm, and Ethan reached out slowly, his hand stopping just short of her, giving her the choice, the control, and for a second, she didn't move, didn't react, and then, cautiously, carefully, she stepped forward just enough to close that distance, her head lowering slightly as his hand made contact for the first time, and the moment was quiet, simple, but powerful in a way that went beyond words, because it wasn't just touch. It was trust, the first real step of it, and Ethan felt it settle into him in a way he hadn't expected, in a way that reached deeper than the fight, deeper than the danger, because it reminded him of something he had lost, something he had buried under years of silence and distance, and as he stood there with them, the cold air around them, the ruined house behind them, the uncertain road ahead stretching out into the distance, He realized something that hit harder than anything else that day. This wasn't just about saving them, they had saved something in him too, something he thought was gone for good, and he looked down at the child, at the dog beside her, and then out toward the open land beyond, and for the first time in a long time, the path in front of him didn't feel empty, didn't feel directionless, it felt like something he could walk with purpose again, not because the past had changed, not because the scars had disappeared, but because something new had begun in its place. Something built not from loss, but from survival, from connection, from the simple, powerful act of refusing to give up, and as he adjusted his stance, ready to move, ready to take the next step, he didn't look back at the house again, because whatever had been there, whatever darkness had lived inside those walls, it was over now, and what remained wasn't fear, wasn't danger, but something far stronger, hope, quiet and steady, walking beside him as he led them forward into whatever came next.